What makes a masterpiece? Is it a good plot? Is it the characters? Maybe even the art style? Well, in 2011, an anime just might have had the answer to that. Steins Gate had the world captivated, giving birth to the Redditors we see today with their superior intellect. Hunter x Hunter was getting its second adaptation where they forgot that Kite existed. And Nichijou was there. It seemed like everything was perfect. There was an anime for just about everyone. Ciao! Madoka Magica appeared, taking the forefront and crushing the opposition. Okay, no, not really. But what it did do was change how the subgenre would be portrayed as forever. But what is it about? How did it revolutionize the subgenre, and is it still worth watching all these years later? Yes, this even has potential to be in your top 5. Madoka Magica is a story about a group of magical girls saving the world from witches alongside their cat-like companion, Kyubei. In order for them to become magical girls, they must ask Kyubei for a single wish to be granted, and no matter how absurd the wish, it will be done, with the result being that they must spend the rest of their days fighting said witches. On the surface, it might sound like a little baby girl show, but in reality, it tells some extremely deep and personal stories, with the repercussions of becoming a magical girl being fully shown to us. Throughout the series, we see this group struggle with maintaining their ideals, portrayed in a way that's reasonably down to earth, all while the feelings of unease periodically wash over us. Because a majority of the show is centered around its characters, there's not much I can say regarding the plot without going over spoilers. I can't exactly say that the plot is simple, because it most definitely is not, especially when we get into the movie, but just know that it shows a more realistic depiction of what it's like to shoulder the heavy burden of tragedy as a kid. Each character has a goal that they've either already reached or are trying to reach. Some of these goals are blatantly told to us or are in the form of their wishes, whereas others are more deeply rooted into their psyches, with the characters themselves not even understanding what they want in this life. Madoka, our main character, on the other hand, doesn't really have any goals. Unlike the rest of the cast, she's lived the most normal life and has the least ambition. She's naive and selfless to an infuriating extent, but that's exactly what makes her character great. She's a character we can sympathize with, and someone who holds up a very high moral standard, which makes her character progression throughout the story all the more intriguing. Over the course of this series, moral compasses misalign, and whether a character is right or wrong comes fully from the viewer's interpretation. The pacing for this show is really good. Every single episode is important, but not to the point where lore revelations feel like they're bombarding you. I mean, except for one. The first couple episodes may feel dragged out, but in reality, it's necessary setup for the inevitable drop, where from that point on, things just get quicker and quicker. For reference, the manga is only 12 chapters long, and that all fits into 12 episodes. It takes its time at the beginning, but the result is very much worth the wait. Trust me, I'm very trustworthy. You should give me your money. But SenHyaku, how did this bring about a new age in the subgenre? Shut up, we'll get to that now, little Timmy. You see, before Madoka Magica, there weren't many dark magical girl shows, but due to the insane popularity of it, the subgenre would explode in relevance. Shows like Magical Girl Raising Project and Yuki Yuna as a Hero would all step up to the mantle, attempting to challenge the already existing masterpiece that was Madoka Magica. But I'm gonna be real, they don't hold a candle to the original. This would lead to the increased popularity of the rabbit hole of a trope that is the subversion of expectations. Now, to say that Madoka Magica pioneered it would be a complete lie, as there were many series that did the same. However, it did bring the plot device more into the light of the anime industry, changing how we would perceive the medium forever. Not only that, but due to the subgenre basically being perfected after all of this, all other series within that same genre would be bombarded with comments stating that it was just another Madoka ripoff. So yeah, by being almost perfect, it killed its competitors. A lot of people like to say that it broke the mold, therefore it's good, but there's a lot more to it than just that. It's a show that gets you swinging from one emotion to another in the span of an episode. It paints a picture of nihilism, but not to the extent that Berserk does, and for that, I gotta say it's a lot more than just a unique show. It's a goddamn masterpiece. But enough about that, let's go over the art. Do not watch this while zoinked on the Zaza, you might get a panic attack. The animation in this show is pretty solid and holds up for its age, but that's not really the main reason you're coming here. There are quite a few art styles in the show, and yet they all somehow blend perfectly. In most shows, the characters will look like their surroundings, but in this one, they look completely different. The architecture and scenery feels grungy, while the characters look like they came straight out of a kid's show. This paired with the soft glows and some of the lighting makes it feel like you're in a haze while watching it. The way that the witch labyrinths are stylized is extremely surreal and oddly fitting. They use animated fairy tale paintings throughout the show in a way that's extremely creative, and honestly, it's gorgeous, just not in the typical way. Not to mention all the symbolism that they hold, which I won't get into because then we'd be here all day. It's nauseating and nightmarish in a good way. The TV series soundtrack is really good. It's dreamy and has that nostalgic feel to it, mostly because it's an older OST. Yuki Kajiura made this, which is the same composer who helped create Sword Art Online and Demon Slayer's OSTs. So yeah, a big shot. The OST has such a wide range of styles. It goes from slice of life happy tones to intense opera to fucking electric guitar riffs. It's random, it's great, it's one of my favorites. The movie's OST takes everything I said and brings it to a whole new level. Oh my god, it's amazing. The leitmotif of Madadame Yo being present in so many songs adds an extra layer to the once happy tune, with Something Everything Is Wrong being one of my favorite pieces, not because of its complexity, but because of it having a completely hollow feeling, despite the melody being uplifting. Also, Absolute Configuration really takes that intense feeling and cranks it to 100. Holy fucking shit, this was metal. While the OST doesn't have an actual translation to some of its songs, it's meant to sound similar to Latin, kinda like Bloodborne's OST. It gives off a Catholic feeling, which is perfect as there are religious innuendos throughout this series, specifically in regards to the German tale of Faust. We'll get to that later. Okay, so now that I've completely riddled your brain with words and craziness, should you watch this series? Yes, please watch it if you haven't already. Going forward, there will be spoilers, so leave now and watch the anime, read the Wraith arc, and then watch the third movie. There's a lot more than that, but that's all you'll need for this video if you're looking to come back later. Also, before you go, make sure to subscribe. I'm still pretty early into my career, so any help is appreciated. And yes, I will still be saying these lines until I hit my 10th video. I'm gonna ride that early channel wave until I die. But without further ado, let's get into the anime. If you've watched my other videos before, you'll know that we have a structure to these, which goes over the plot points that I find relevant, a character analysis, and then I do a bit of critique. But before we get into it, I just wanted to say, god damn, this shit was downright diabolically disastrous. As a kid, I was already aware that this was a darker show thanks to some buddies telling me about it, so fast forward into the future when I became a bigger, tougher, manlier man, I just thought to myself, how bad could it possibly be? Let's see. Yeah, it was quite dark. So let's start this off by discussing our main character Madoka, the character who can in fact beat Goku. God, I can already see the comments. Madoka is the "with this treasure I summon" character of this universe. Throughout the entire bloody anime, Madoka is constantly being whisked away by the idea of becoming a magical girl to save someone. She's the type of character who would throw their life away to save the life of someone they literally just met, and just on that fact alone, we can deduce that she's a character who lacks self-esteem. In fact, the very first scene is portraying Madoka considering throwing her life away. She traverses a dream where she watches Homura fight the Walpurgisnacht that would kill Madoka in previous timelines. I'm so sorry for my pronunciation if it's wrong. Madoka is asked by Kyubei to make a contract to become a magical girl to save Homura before she is woken up. Funnily enough, in episode 10, this is explained as a vision from the previous timeline, which could be foreshadowing for Madoka's powers of transcending time, seeing as she not only witnessed but also retained the memory of an event that had happened in a completely separate timeline. Right after this, she meets Homura for the first time in school, who casually carries herself around like the main protagonist she is. Homura's strange. As we know, she's a lot smarter than she lets off, knowing things about the world that even the other girls don't. Homura's goal is to stop Madoka from becoming a magical girl, which is like trying to stop a kid from putting a fork into an outlet. You can't. Just give up. They'll be fine. Don't worry. Trust me. You can trust me. You should give me your money. Not only that, but being stuck in a time loop for God knows how long trying to stop the inevitable would put a screw loose in just about anyone. Madoka and Sayaka would meet a magical girl named Mami who would teach them the ways of living in her world. She's meant to be a sort of teacher to these characters, and at first, it seems like this kind of life is well worth having any wish come true. And this is where the show spirals into chaos. At the time of its release, we would just assume that this was a nice little show, but with the opening and ending even showing slice of life shenanigans, which is something that the beloved JJK would adopt as well. But in reality, this was a story about the struggle of fate and the tragedy awaiting those who deemed themselves to be heroes. Mami's an interesting character. She's the only one who can admit she's holding up a front the whole time, and she helps showcase through her emotions just how disastrous of a life she's chosen. She's completely alone, and the world of magical girls is extremely dangerous. It's why she tries to convince Madoka and Sayaka to become magical girls like her. She's losing her mind doing a thankless job, and so having people as bright as Madoka and Sayaka are a much needed breath of fresh air for her. Mami's death, despite how little exposition she got, does hit, just not in the way that some of the audience thinks that it should. While it might not hit in the way that it's sad, it's meant to be more of a shock factor kind of thing. The fact that we are witnessing the loss of innocence and the death of another child through the lens of other children is incredibly messed up when you bring it down to its bare bones. Not only that, but this is the moment that we realize that nobody here is going to have a happy ending. This event would be the start of this timeline's descent, with our next victim in all of this being Sayaka. Honestly, out of all the characters, Sayaka's fate is probably the most tragic of them. She's one of the most naive amongst their main cast, second only to Madoka, which makes her a prime target for Kyubei's manipulation. Kyubei's entire goal at this point in the story is to get Madoka to become a magical girl to meet the universe's quota for energy. So influencing the person closest to Madoka to become a magical girl is honestly one of the more logical ways of going about it. As soon as Sayaka ends up becoming a magical girl, she learns the truth behind what's happened to her. Her soul's become enslaved to Kyubei's agenda and there's literally nothing she can do. It's devastating, especially since she had just transitioned into a magical girl only a couple days prior to this information. Sayaka tried to phrase her wish in a way that's selfless, but when the consequences come crushing down, it's apparent that in this self-narrative of trying to be the just, caring, and altruistic one, she ultimately makes mistakes that harm her more than anyone else. This narrative of putting others before you being a catalyst for bad things happening continues to make itself relevant throughout the story. For example, the moment when Sayaka killed a degenerate man on the train. Yes, she did kill them in my mind because the manga showed blood dripping from her sword, so I'm going with that. Sayaka killing them can most definitely be seen as a form of justice, but it was at the cost of her sanity. By killing them, she's just traded in her chance at living with any sort of solace. Murder's not a light crime to witness, and it's an even harder crime to come to terms with after committing. Her sense of justice is strong, but her emotions are stronger, and it's depressing to see how it all ends up going downhill from here. Her killing them to enact justice just dragged her deeper into nihilism. To emphasize even more on this scene though, it can be seen as a sort of loss of innocence. Sayaka already feels like she's being used, and to hear that it's not only like that in the world that she's trapped in, but also the world that she would have continued to live in fucks her up. Her worldview is being altered here, and she's being introduced to the ideas of misogyny. It's, to be quite frank, disturbing. She's becoming more nihilistic by the moment, and hearing these men say that women end up as bitches closely relates to the newfound revelation that magical girls end up as witches, with both being tied to impurities. In both situations, once the person is used up in the eyes of the perpetrator, they're tossed away. I can't blame her for killing them. She's like 14 and has no idea how to handle her emotions, with seemingly no parental figures around to save her from her own mind. Yes, being 14 doesn't excuse someone from murder, but these are some extremely specific circumstances that are the result of the supernatural occurring. Maybe I'm reading into it too much, but I do believe that this is one of the most important scenes in the show, and also one of my personal favorites. But before we continue, let's go over our other main character, Kyoko. Kyoko has one of the more traumatic pasts in this group, second only to Homura. As a kid, she loved her family to the fullest, and so she, like Sayaka, made a selfless wish to help her family prosper, only for it to backfire on her. Her father would learn of how he never actually succeeded in his sermons and how it was all just the work of what he'd consider the devil. To be fair, he's not very far off. As a result of this realization, he'd end up killing himself and his family, leaving only Kyoko to witness the carnage left behind. This is exactly why she hides the core part of her character that cares a lot more. There's a lot of trauma circulating through her mind, and so she can't really bring herself to be open to others. Not only that, but she can't help but see a bit of her past self in Sayaka, and so by fighting Sayaka, she showcases a lot of her own self-hatred. It's the person she really is, and it's someone that got her into the position she's in, so she opts to live as selfishly as possible, stealing food and experiencing her life in a way that she deems the fullest. So when Sayaka turns into a witch, Kyoko decides to show compassion by dying alongside her, showing love to the person who felt impure in those final moments despite it being a futile act. People do irrational things out of care, and Kyoko's act was a microcosm for the sacrifice that Madoka would do for the entire universe. After all of this, Kyubei talks with Madoka and oh boy, are you gonna hear me yap my brain out about this thing. Kyubei is one of my favorite antagonists, period. He's an absolute piece of shit, but he's completely incapable of understanding that. He's a utilitarian, and so the sacrifice of a tiny portion of a lower life form's population pool is sensible to him. Emotions aren't a thing that exists to them. The only way forward is through cold, hard facts. If you know me, you know that Bondrewd is one of my favorite antagonists of all time, so obviously Kyubei had to be a runner-up for one of my favorites too. The biggest difference to me is how they actually react to what they do. Bondrewd is a character that has been shown to care for others, albeit in a very strange and illogical way, whereas Kyubei just doesn't give a single shit about anyone and disappears. They both have the reasons for what they do, but Bondrewd has something that Kyubei doesn't: self-awareness. Also, Kyubei is a liar. He lies by omission, which is by not stating all the facts that the other party needs to know. He's aware that this is especially easy to do to children, and so he utilizes it to the maximum. He grooms these children into becoming magical girls, and when they learn of the truth, he blames it on them for being stupid enough to be tricked. It's disgusting yet incredibly brilliant how UROBUCHI essentially created a main antagonist who closely relates to sexual offenders. I mean, shit, look at Sayaka's reaction when she learned that her soul's been separated from her body. She basically calls herself unworthy of Kyosuke because of what's happened to her. It's disturbing. Kyubei is the reason behind why Kyoko sacrificed herself. He knew that Kyoko trying to save Sayaka wouldn't do anything, so he let her attempt it under false pretenses that while it's unlikely to work, it could work if she believed hard enough. Also, Kyubei has even lied to their faces. He clearly states to Madoka here that he intends to let humanity and his kind coexist once the quota for energy is met, but in a timeline where they do meet their quota due to Madoka turning into a witch, he just fucking pieces out. He's incredibly cunning and ruthless, but honestly, without the incubators, would the universe still even exist? We have no idea, but this idea of darkness being necessary for life to continue has been an ongoing theme for a long time, with the most common iteration of it being yin and yang. Speaking of yin and yang though, let's talk about the two most important characters of this series, Madoka and Homura. Before we continue, just know that I will be referencing some things that happened in the Wraith arc of this series. It was never animated, so I'm sorry, but you'll have to read it if you want full context. It goes a lot more in depth of Homura's actions in the movie, and also gives us more context of how Madoka changed the universe, helping us understand why exactly Homura's as much of a mess as she is in the movie. Anyways, without further ado, let's talk about these two. Let me start off by saying that Homura is not the hero of this story. Her entire purpose is surrounding someone she just met at the point of obsession, but I can't really say it's her fault. She, like everyone else in the story, was tricked into forming a contract with Kyubei, and unlike everyone else in the story, has been revisiting the deaths of everyone around her over and over. Her reason for living at this point is to save Madoka, and so nobody else matters to her in a way that's objective, as their deaths are inevitable in her eyes. A misconception that was being thrown around that I myself fell for was that Homura doesn't care about the rest of the group. Okay, so she's not a sociopath in the end, so I don't think that's the case. I just think that she gave up on them because she doesn't believe that it fits in with her goals, on top of the fact that she has limited capabilities on what she can do to begin with. To Homura, their deaths are fated to happen, so why bother getting in the way? After all, the one she made the wish for was Madoka, not them. If she were to give up on Madoka, not only would she inevitably give in to the witch's curse, but Madoka's karmic fate would destroy the world, leaving Homura stuck between a rock and a hard place. But even after Madoka makes her decision to become a magical girl, with her even ascending to become a principal of the world, Homura never lets go of her. It's horrific how much abuse this girl's gone through. Madoka is her everything, so with her existing everywhere but also completely out of reach, I can only imagine how tortured she must feel. Madoka exists outside a point of time now. History's been rewritten, and so Homura can't stop Madoka from making the sacrifice. Not only that, but she trades in her time manipulation for memory manipulation magic before the events of the Wraith arc, which just sends her plummeting into nihilism due to her losing her mind over what's real and what isn't. Homura's insanity being on full blast during the Wraith arc was actually heartbreaking. She's even more alone in this whole Madoka ordeal than she was before, and her questioning whether it was all just in her head was tragic, yet extremely well done. It's that soul-crushing realization that everything you've known so far could have just been based on lies, and it's very much akin to when Sayaka's worldview got flipped. To me, this was probably one of the most depressing moments, especially this page right here where we can see the moment she came to that conclusion. Her desire to remember Madoka was both a miracle and a curse in these moments. Now let's talk more about with this treasure I summon. Madoka, despite her weak-willed nature, isn't ever fully in the wrong. The mistakes she makes are mostly due to her lack of understanding of what's going on around her, which is entirely Kyubei's fault. She's been raised by a loving family, and so she's extremely compassionate to an unhealthy degree. Despite other characters' strengths being solely about how selfish they are, Madoka, the most selfless of them, stands at the pinnacle of them all only due to the selfishness of Homura. And yes, she is selfish, we'll see more of that in the movie. It's chaotically ironic, but also surprisingly logical. Homura sacrifices everything and everyone to ensure Madoka's safety, and Madoka, being aware of this, decides to solve the problem for everyone by this time flipping the narrative and being the only one to disappear this time. The thing is that Madoka has no idea just how deep Homura's obsession goes. Before we continue on to the movie, let's talk about how this all relates to the tale of Faust. This entire show is the result of a Faustian bargain, and so it makes sense that there would be parallels to its tale. I'll go over what I personally noticed, and feel free to comment down below any of your personal findings and parallels. I love reading about this stuff and feeling smarter than I actually am. First off, right on the nose with this one, but Madoka's witch form is named Kriemhild Gretchen, and Gretchen is the shortened form of the name Margaret, which is the English way of saying Marguerite, the name of the woman who Faust falls in love with in the first part. Madoka is destined to die, being imprisoned by her fate with only Homura being able to save her, just as Marguerite was quite literally imprisoned and was given the saving hand of Faust. In the final timeline, Madoka refuses Homura's protection and opts to save her instead. She then, in a way, dies and ascends to a higher plane, saving the souls who have been tricked by Kyubey, just as Marguerite had been granted access to heaven after refusing to be saved by Faust. Homura and the magical girls in the story reflect the character of Faust, with both wishing for something that's seemingly impossible, with the outcome being eternal damnation, or in this case, becoming a witch. In Faust's case, he's given a time limit, though this can also be true for this story seeing as we never see any magical girls that are full-grown adults, so for all we know there could be an unstated time limit on their lives. Kyubey relates to Mephistopheles in that they're the antagonist of their respective stories. You see, each of them serves a greater purpose that goes beyond what we can imagine, and in Faust, despite Mephistopheles being the antagonist and bound to Lucifer, is still carrying out the will of God, much like how Kyubey is tied to the sustaining of the universe. Not only that, but both go back on their words of not lying, with Mephistopheles trying to mislead Faust into worldly pleasures to satisfy the pact that was made between the two, which stated that should he find satisfaction in the world before the timer had run out, it would lead to his death, something that Faust himself put in the pact. Mephistopheles will do anything to satisfy Lucifer's needs, and so going back on his word and misleading Faust isn't something he's actually fully against, much like how Kyubey will do anything to satisfy the sustaining of the universe. Also, Kyubey and Mephistopheles both appear in innocent forms, with the latter making his first appearance to Faust as a poodle, and Kyubey as an injured helpless cat to Madoka in the final timeline. But it's time to talk about the movie! Holy moly, this was a goddamn trip. From the symbolism of the blimps sailing through the air relating to the Hindenburg, to hints at the oncoming catastrophe, to the children throwing pomegranates, which in Greek mythology symbolizes eternal life, while cheering Gott ist tot, which in German translates to God is dead. This ended up turning into one of my favorite anime films of all time. So first off, we get to see the ideal world for this group. They work together well and demolish everything, stuff's light work for them, and for the first time, we get to see this entire group live in relative peace. But despite all that, something is most definitely wrong. We just came back from watching the anime or reading the Wraith arc. There's no way in hell things are this happy now, not to mention all the fairy paintings plaguing the area even when they're not fighting, on top of the fact that the students' faces are just blurs. Also, Madoka's here. She's not supposed to be here. She literally doesn't exist anymore. But you see, the thing is, even with it all being very obviously fake, I kinda couldn't help but wish it wasn't. Each of their fates are tragic, and seeing them live the life that they were actually promised feels deserved. But in the end, this is Madoka we're talking about, so no happy endings for you! Over time, Homura would begin to catch on that something's not right. She's happy. What the fuck, that's not supposed to happen. This would give rise to an investigation with Kyoko to find out what's exactly wrong with this place, and also the point where shit starts to ramp up. The world around them falls apart once they reach Kazamino, it starts to look more like the witch labyrinth that it is, and their senses of direction become misguided. This is the point where Homura actually returns. She now realizes that this world is a problem to not only her, but also Madoka. Witches aren't supposed to exist anymore due to the law of cycles, so how did this come to pass? Anything and anyone who got in the way from this point on was an obstacle that needed to be removed. This lady is clinically insane. Anyways, let's talk about how our other characters changed, starting with Kyoko. Like the other characters, Kyoko is living her ideal life. She's the same Kyoko we've known this whole time, just under different circumstances. In this world, Sayaka and her are finally on the same page, unlike the previous worlds, and so the two can actually bond like how Kyoko wished for it to be in the Wraith arc. Even with all that, she's still Kyoko though, and unlike the rest of the cast, is still prone to second guessing. So when Homura asks her to take a trip with her to Kazamino City, Kyoko entertains her request. I have nothing more to say on this matter, on to Mami and Homura's fight. Homura and Mami's fight is the best one in the movie. Oh my god, it's amazing. There's actually quite a lot to talk about here, but let me rant about Nagisa first. Who is this baby? Why are they here? Can somebody explain to me how she's important to the plot? She's actually got a pretty solid backstory from Magia record, and so she does have a lot of potential, which is exactly why I'm not satisfied with what they did to her in the movie. Hopefully in the future they flesh out her character more because she had no reason to be included in this story. Yes, I'm aware that she's the witch that killed Mami, but I just don't see why she's important. I understand that she's supposed to be the first indicator that witches exist in this world, but Sayaka already fulfills that, and not to mention the fairy paintings just plaguing the world, just roaming free. He didn't do much for the plot in the end other than breed conflict between Homura and Mami, so I mean, if the writers just needed an excuse for these two to fight, then I'll take it, cause god damn! Oh my god, holy shit, what the fuck is going on? Look what you done! Homura and Mami's fight helps us understand Homura's lack of perspective. She says that Mami's a softie who puts up a facade of being duty-bound, essentially saying that she's a snake-ass bitch. But when push comes to shove, Homura's the exact same. Homura, in their fight, is visibly disturbed by the idea of hurting Mami, and even after being given the opportunity to kill Mami for getting in her way, she backs out and aims for her leg instead. Just in that one gesture, we're told a million things. Homura does care about the main cast, whether it be due to lingering feelings from her original timeline, or the fact that she's as naive as the rest, her sense of altruism is still very much there. She hates Mami the most as well because she's the most like her, with even their strengths being on par with one another. It's funny because Mami and Homura can both be seen as the more selfish ones in the group, with Mami even siding with Kyubei at one point in order to lure Sayaka and Madoka into becoming magical girls with her to cure her fears, and yet both struggle all the same with hurting each other. They're extremely similar characters with different circumstances. Meanwhile, Kyubei doesn't change at all. Yep, he's the exact same little rat as before. But from here on out, we only talk about the goats of this movie, starting with Sayaka. Sayaka was one of those characters that I already liked at the beginning, considering how tragic all of her fates ended up being across all timelines, so seeing her and Homura clash was actually one of my favorite parts of this movie. Sayaka throughout the anime was someone who fought against the current of fate at all costs despite all arrows pointing otherwise, so to see her as a character who's going with the flow gave some more depth to her. Her view of the world goes from black and white to that of morally grey. She questions Homura's morality and comes to accept her witch form after being saved by Madoka, viewing it as a sort of strength of hers and using it in combat. She can see both sides of the world, and while she may still be in love with Kyosuke, she's able to move on in a way that's healthy, whilst also being happy for Hitomi despite her being a snake-ass bitch. In the end, this doesn't stop Homura from finding the truth behind this world, and Sayaka doesn't get in her way. She accepts that Homura is the way she is, and makes room for her to discover what's truly happened. She wasn't against Homura, she was just testing her. Now, let's finally shift our focus onto how Madoka and Homura fit into all of this. Madoka and Homura's conversation is yet another one of my favorite scenes in this movie. Honestly, the entire second half of this movie is absolute cinema. I must have watched Homura's realization and transformation like 10 times before writing this script. Back on topic. In this conversation, we witness Homura's delusions at full force and begin to piece together that this isn't Madoka. Like, at all. Madoka isn't the type of character who would be too scared to sacrifice herself because it would mean leaving everyone behind. Not only does Madoka already have extremely low self-esteem, but she did it so everyone could go forward and transition into their next stage of life cleanly, and we even see how happy Madoka is with her decision in the final episode of the anime. Madoka is finally useful, which was her main flaw, so why would she not want to do this? The words that came out of the fake Madoka mean absolutely nothing, but to Homura, those words were everything she needed. And it's at this point in the story we realize Homura doesn't actually love Madoka. Homura loves the idea of Madoka. Everything that Homura has sacrificed has been for an idealized version of a person. Homura has let countless people die, started an infinite time loop, and risked her life multiple times just for the sake of a character. Not a person, a character. The Madoka that Homura's in love with doesn't exist anymore. With her new resolve, Homura decides to experiment on herself to see if she's the witch. This world seems perfect, but more so in her favor than anyone else's. All the others have some sort of negative aspect to their characters here that Homura disagrees with, except for Madoka. And so, Homura finally realizes what's happened to her. Holy shit, I have no words for this. Easily one of the best scenes in this series. The tragic irony of Homura being the witch the whole time made my jaw drop. Like, what the fuck? Also, the soundtrack that plays? Oh my god, you're hearing it right now. This shit's amazing. I have no other words from this point on. After this, we get some more magical girl stuff. Yay! Woohoo! I mean, shit gets pretty dark at times here, but it's overall a positive note. And ooh, look, Madoka's gonna save Homura now. They'll finally be reunited. Bruh. At the end of the movie, she stabs everyone in the fucking back and traps the universe, including Madoka, in her world after evolving into a demon who can rewrite the very principles of the universe. Yeah, the power scaling on this show goes crazy. But here's the thing, I don't blame her. She's been tortured for years on end. I mean, the very concept of happiness was enough for her to question everything. It's tragic, but also not the most surprising looking back on it all. She's in love with the idea of madoka. Why wouldn't she want madoka to be all hers? She's fucking insane, and again, who wouldn't be? Homura's final words to madoka regarding them potentially becoming enemies in the future is some insane foreshadowing, especially if we're talking about the ending of the second act of Faust. You see, there are two endings to Faust, and in one, Faust is saved by Marguerite and is sent to heaven because of her, while the other has Faust being dragged down to hell. The show so far has typically shown the light at the end of the tunnel, so as much as it'd be great for it to do that again, I'm not really as down with it as we've already gotten our happy ending before with madoka saving all magical girls. If anything, I'd rather have madoka return to her principal status, and due to the nature of Homura's powers being that of the devil, they become enemies, separating the two forever. It would be a fitting punishment for Homura's selfishness, but also extremely depressing just because we've been on her side this whole time. I don't think this will happen though because of how madoka's personality is, but what can I say? I'm a sucker for tragedies. Okay, let's finish this up and give it a rate. 10 out of 10. Okay, no, 9.8. I can't give it a 10 just yet because we were left on such a massive cliffhanger and the next movie is just around the corner. If this video does well, I'll definitely be making a video on the movie, cause my god, even the trailer has a lot to talk about. Fuck it, even if this video does bad, I might still do it just cause after writing this essay, this series has skyrocketed to my top 5, easily. There's a lot of things I'd have loved to cover, but didn't feel were necessary and felt more like filler, so who knows, maybe I'll get back to it later because this was honestly just a lot of fun. Comment down below what you thought of the show and subscribe. My other videos have a spoiler-free section at the beginning, so if you haven't watched the series I've covered, don't worry, I've got you.